Thank you very much for being here. To today's lecture by Tereza Matějčková, whom I sincerely thank for having accepted our invitation, is the first of a series of lectures that we have organized for these jubileums year 50 years from the birth of Hegel. The idea was to discuss with scholars from various parts of the world the importance that Hegel's philosophy still has today. These are 13 lectures that from today until the end of December 2020 will mark the activity of our research group. I would like to mention here the names that will take part to our lectures. Tereza Matějčková today, and then Miguel Justi from Peru, Hector Ferreiro from Buenos Aires, Paul Cotman from New York, James Crimes from Claremont McKenna College, Dina Emmons from Berlin, Marco Aurelio Verle from Sao Paulo, Eva Goylen from Berlin, Christopher Yeomans from Purdue, Christophe Bouton from Bordeaux, Julia Peters from Tübingen, Catherine Malabou from London, and Angelica Nuzzo from New York. I'm very grateful really to all the scholars who have accepted our invitation, and together with them I would like to thank the members of the research group, in particular Francesco Campana, Luca Corti and Armando Manchisi, for the great organizational work. I'm very happy that Tereza Matějčková, a young scholar, is opening the series. Tereza currently works at the Institute of Philosophy and Religious Studies of the Charles University in Prague. Tereza does research in German idealism, philosophy of religion, and continental philosophy. Her most recent publication is the book that is, in a certain sense, at the origin of today's talk. And the title of the book is Gibt es eine Welt in Hegels Phenomenologie? Is there a word in Hegel's phenomenology? This book was published by Mohr Siebeck in 2018, and the title of today's talk is What is Absent from the Phenomenology of Spirit, the World, the Individual. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great honor to speak here as part of this wonderful series. So thank you to Luca, and thank you to the organizers as well, and to the audience. And yes, my title invites for two questions. Is there a world, is there an individual in the phenomenology of spirit? And it is a question maybe as well very much under the influence of a tradition that is very lively in my part of the world, or in the world, in the part where I come from the Czech Republic. Because many phenomenologists, among others Jan Patočka, have always read the phenomenology as something that Hegel's phenomenology as something that basically is in a manner even a philosophy that is that tries to abolish the world, or that tries to even abolish the world, and with it the individual as well, as a part of this finite plurality, and take everything up into a general spirit. So I will start by talking about the world, and generally then or gradually I will come over to the individual as well. And just to illustrate what I have in mind is you'll see, for instance, in Patočka, the natural world as a philosophical problem, where he claims, well, Hegel's philosophy is essentially worldless. and everything is in the end taken up by the spirit that somehow integrates finitude and multitude in itself. And we see, of course, as well Löwit's contribution into this tradition, and but it's of course others. We could add others to this as well as Heidegger, etc. So, and generally, I think in the phenomenological tradition, this mistrust or suspicion has been quite strong because the Lebenswelt is such a strong concept in this philosophical tradition. And now, against this, I want to argue that in fact Hegel's phenomenology of spirit does have a positive concept of the world. I want to show that Hegel basically treats the world explicitly on every level of the phenomenology of spirit, consciousness, self-consciousness, reason, and of course then spirit. And I want to, but of course this is even if he wants to destroy it, you have to deal a lot with what you want to destroy. So the mere occurrence of this concept is not something something that I could base my argument on. But I want to show that Hegel really wants works positively with the concept of the world, and eventually wants to show that at the end of the phenomenology, something like a true world appears, a true world in which the absolute knowledge can be formulated or articulated. So this is basically the voyage I want to invite you to follow with me. And in this sense, I'm basically joining the tradition of reading the Phenomenology of Spirit as a Bildungsgeschichte. Yet I do not claim that what wird hier gebildet, what is formulated here, or what is built up here is the individual or the consciousness as such. But I want to claim that it is in fact the world, that a specific type of world that gradually appears from all the vain attempts of the consciousness to grasp reality and to find and found a home where it can be free. So, and I want to be more concrete about what I have in mind when I'm talking about the world. And for this, I will base myself, or I will found my argument on the introduction of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, where he uses the concept of the world and worldliness. And before I go over to the world, I will just mention this specific dynamics that is involved in consciousness. So you know that consciousness is a dynamics that goes in two directions. It has intentionality, or it is intentionality. So it is consciousness of an object, and the object itself is basically an occasion for for knowing itself as well, for forming self-consciousness. So consciousness is directed towards the object. And as directed towards the object, it learns to know itself. And what I want to claim is that in this basic dynamics, or in this basic movement, consciousness always does more than it thinks it does. If consciousness perceives, then it perceives always more than it explicitly perceives. And if it thinks, then it thinks more than it explicitly thinks. And then if it acts, then the problem starts. Because it realizes that it always does more than it wanted to do. And then we have these wonderful passages on the tragic nature of action. Because what you want to do is never really what you have done is never one-to-one the same with what you intended. And so there is something more to every act of the consciousness. And I think this is a very specific discovery that Hegel has made, and I want to call this discovery, or I want to call the experience that consciousness does a substantial form of experience, claiming that in whatever the consciousness does, it always reflects already unconsciously, quite often, certain social coordinates, certain cultural coordinates, and of course it is dependent on the language it is given, and it receives and it shapes by how it uses it. So this is of course not my discovery in Hegel. This is basically Hegel's concept of holism. That one is already to know that the individual, in order for the individual to know an individual thing, it does have to know a lot of things, and this is where the concept of whole comes in, or the concept of holism. It is a restricted form of holism. Because it is always a concrete form of wholeness. Of course, Hegel does not talk about a general whole, about a universal whole that would be eternal for all times. But what I want to claim is that with every individual act, the individual by its acts creates a context and brings a context with it. So this is the individual and singular act does not stand in opposition to the concept of the whole, but they are basically two sides of the same coin. Therefore I say restricted wholeness, because it's not of a universal or eternal kind. And with this, for me, the concept of the world comes in, because I want to claim that this restricted wholeness can, in its specificity and concreteness, be conceived of as a certain world. And what I want to say is that we can understand, or we can interpret the phenomenology of spirit based on three moments. Of course, there is consciousness, and consciousness relates or tries to understand reality. And in order to understand and to relate to reality, it forms what I call certain world pictures. And these world pictures involve certain principles and what the consciousness thinks most important about reality. It is a type, I would call it a plan or a model, according to which consciousness finds its way in reality, grasps reality, understands reality. And of course, this is not an intellectual concept only, because once you have a plan, you act according to it, and then you instantiate it. And by this, so there is something constructive to this. By acting according to a world picture, you create this world. And yet, at every stage of the phenomenology, what I will show you immediately, consciousness, or this is my thesis, creates a certain world picture, and at every level, the world picture, in the end, basically disintegrates. Because why? Because consciousness has not grasped correctly the principles of reality. So there is still a clash between the model and what reality really is. And this clash leads to a disintegration and to a new attempt to formulate a new concept of what reality is, a new world. And with the articulation of the world, the consciousness as well finds itself in a new world. And I want to claim that basically the phenomenology of spirit can be understood as a sequence of world pictures that gradually evolve with the promise, or with probably Hegel's insight, that at the end consciousness could be able to really formulate a world, a model of reality that would be one with reality. And then the world would fall one to one into reality, and the consciousness would basically be confronted or face the true world as real. So this would be the happy end. Well, we will see if it does work and if we are convinced by Hegel and by my interpretation of it. This is, of course, the most important question. But let's start. So these are just three moments: consciousness, world, reality. These will be really important for this schematic understanding of phenomenology, which is something really by this I make myself sense of the phenomenology, and it is really my way of reading it and what helped me. So it is, and when I started reading the Phenomenology of Spirit, I always thought, well, I need to get a whole picture of the Phenomenology of Spirit, otherwise you won't understand it. But then, of course, there are some big points with this, but you will tell me then certainly yourself. I will skip this. Now, the first level, consciousness formulates a first world picture. And now, what does consciousness believe perception is? What does it believe the world to be? What does it believe reality to be? And what we learn at this level is that consciousness basically thinks that perception is something like adding up. You perceive something by perceiving individual qualities of this thing, and then you add up these qualities and you get the thing. And there is, of course, this example with the salt. And then based on this, consciousness assumes that, well, this adding up or this summation may be really what the world is, a manifold that is there with individual things next to each other. And but this would not be enough for a concept of the world. And so consciousness at the same time devises an ordering principle, a general principle that orders these individual pieces that make up the world. And I used this symbol of the puzzle as something the consciousness thinks the world is, and it wants somehow consciousness wants the world to be this way because it is reluctant to play a part in reality. You know, you certainly remember that consciousness wants to be passive. Basically, it thinks that it captures reality if it leaves reality as it is. So I just add up and I leave it as it is. What is interesting that immediately at the level of consciousness, consciousness at the same time looks for a general principle, and it finds these general principles in devising what Hegel explicitly calls the supersensible world, or later as well the supersubjective world. And this is a world that is basically for Hegel made up of abstract laws, which are for him at this stage the physical laws, but there are as well some hints at theology. And what we see here is that what consciousness does is that it wants to escape the manifold, it wants to escape the vanishing present, it wants to escape the fleeting, it wants to escape the timely, it wants to find itself in the eternal, the standing, the unitary, it reaches for some form of identity. And so and what is interesting is that it takes all these traditional as well more theological concepts to create a world that is above the sensible world, and somehow denigrates the sensible world. Consciousness believes the truth of the manifold is unity. The truth of movement is standing still. The truth of time is eternity. And so gradually, above this manifold that it perceives, a world of laws that ideally would be submitted to one individual highest law emerge. Yet it is there is something. So we can say that the sensible world is conceived of as a sum of manifold objects, and that the supersensible world is the stable image of unstable appearances. And at this stage, really, what Hegel's example are the physical laws, which is quite an interesting example as well. And but he says that this is strange. We have basically found a model according to which we can translate the reality into something else. So we say this something else is the truth of what we started with. And Hegel says, well, isn't this a trick? Isn't thinking here playing tricks on us? Because we started off, we wanted to know the appearances, what the principle of the puzzle is. And what we then said, we found this principle, or we pictured a model of what the origin of the manifold might be, and we formulated laws. And then we somehow twisted it on its head and said, "This is the true one. This is the source and origin of reality." And what we have forgotten is that it was only a model in order to understand the sensible world. And so we basically said that the laws are the origins of the sensible, but laws cannot be an origin of the sensible world. They can be a mechanism in order to explain them, but they are not the ontological origin of. And this is actually the what Hegel assumes consciousness wants to say, and then Hegel as well says, well, this is an odd idea. Why do we have in theology and as well in certain philosophical tradition this idea that unity is somehow more than plurality, and identity more than difference? Where does this ontological advancement of these concepts come from? And then Hegel uses basically and reduces it ab absurdum, and he says, well, if we say that the origin of movement is unmovement, or the first unmoved mover, then we can as well say that the origin of what is white is black, and what is sweet is sour, and it would be it has the same status. And but it's interesting that Hegel does not say this is wrong. It's just strange. It might be true, but it's really deeply strange. And so what he says is we have found basically a code to translate the present world into something completely else. Well, that's not that can be a very good means of survival, actually. And some religious language lives from this recoding. And Hegel's philosophy, in a way, lives from this recoding, or from a way of interesting work with oppositions as well. But the problem is that in the first section, we are led away from the present world. We are led away from experiencing the world as it happens in its experiencing. And with the idea of a supersensible world that we mistake for the ontological origin. But once again, Hegel does not say that it's wrong. This is actually the interesting thing about the phenomenology of spirit. Everyone does everything right in a way, and everything goes badly, and which is an interesting lesson about life as well. You don't have to make mistakes in order to suffer, really. And this is I think an interesting part of Hegel's dialectics. But what he says, these oppositions that we gleaned from this movement of thought are actually interesting, but they have to be put to a different use. They are not to be distributed on two worlds, but we have somehow to smash these words together and show that these oppositions have their efficacy and live in the truest sense of the word, live in this present immanent world. And this is where Hegel formulates the concept of the inner difference. And this is, I think, the most very important concept of this passage. Because with this, Hegel as well, or consciousness, refuses the idea that perception is adding up. The inner difference, allows consciousness to think that somehow the oppositions are in the perceived thing themselves as perceived. So we do not perceive individual self-enclosed identities. What we perceive is differences, contrasts, certain phenomena on a background. We do not perceive colors as, for instance, red. There is no red as such. Red is that what is not blue, etc. As perceived, of course, and he wants basically he shows that this might be not only a better understanding of what reality is, but it goes hand in hand with a new concept of perception. Perception is seeing differences, seeing contrasts, and of course, with contrast, you somehow have to have two competing two competing phenomena. And then we are in the midst of Hegel's dialectics when he says, yes, already the self-same repels itself from itself. So any identity is, as he said, afflicted with an opposition. You cannot think any identity irrespective of difference, and identity is what is not different. So. Thanks to this idea of the inner difference, and thanks to this new idea of what perception is, in the end, it is here that Hegel formulates an immanent principle of the world, which is his dialectics, the soul, which he calls here now, quite strangely, the soul of the world, the universal blood, and which is this for him this play of oppositions. Now, and with this, consciousness realizes that okay, maybe this experience has led me to the insight that the world is not a sum of things, but that it's an immense relation. It's a relation. The essence of being is relation. And this is, of course, we are here already close to Hegel's ontology itself. And this is, once again, with the new concept of the world comes a new faculty in play. And of course, the best example of what an inner difference is self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is consciousness that relates itself to itself without making, or by making a difference that is not a difference, as Hegel says. So here we are entering a new world picture. And here the dominating idea is that the world is not a sum, but it's a relation. And, or that the principle of experience is relation. And a relation is always attention. This is quite often underestimated in these passages who basically focus on the idea of idea of mutual recognition, and but the fact is that mutual recognition is described only in 2 passages, and then the entire the rest is about fights and about the fight of life over death. What is important is that now the consciousness enters a world of relations. Why? Because it realizes that it itself is a relation, and that his world is as for him only on condition that it itself relates to this world. So it realizes that reality might not be that indifferent to my existence, and that I might myself enter into reality, and that this passive stance towards reality might have been a mistake. But what you realize as well is that once you strengthen self-consciousness, you get conflicts. Once self-consciousness arises, what you get are conflicts. Why? Well, because self-consciousness realizes that there is always something else that it is not, and that it itself is defined against something else, through which it is at the same time conditioned. And with this, what self-consciousness discovers at this level is that relation is tension, and with tension comes pain, and with tension comes dissatisfaction. And in fact, it is not an arbitrary relation or an arbitrary feature of self-consciousness that it is sometimes dissatisfied. This dissatisfaction is somehow essentially linked to self-consciousness. That's the difficult gift of self-consciousness, some form of constant dissatisfaction, because you know that you are constituted by what? By a difference. And this might be not the most comfortable position to find yourself in. And what we see once again, so yeah, here this is just an illustration of how quick the way is from relation to conflict, which you of course know yourself. but certainly from your life as well and your life word. But what is interesting here is that we've noticed that at the level of consciousness, what was the problem? The problem was the manifold, the finite. It was something that these were the mere appearances. Then consciousness grew up slightly and said, I have to find a way to live with these differences and to deal with them better, to understand them and to accept them. And now self-consciousness meets again this form of dissatisfaction, but now it is itself that is dissatisfied with itself, because it is self-consciousness. So the finitude is now related to self-consciousness, and it does not like itself to say it in a very banal way. And once again, it wants to somehow get rid of this finitude, of this pain it encounters wherever it goes, because it is him or her. And so it wants to get rid of it. And what does it do? Well, it devises otherworldly realms once again. It once again forms something that Hegel calls the unchangeable, or the world of the beyond. And once again it comes up with the claim that once again this strange twist in thought appears, that we have to get rid of finitude, and then we have to build a more integrated world, or we have to articulate this concept of a more reconciled, even world of salvation, and yet once again, as now we have seen at the level of consciousness that somehow consciousness then realized, well, this is absurd. And what does self-consciousness come up with when it, on the level of the unhappy consciousness, formulates this parallel, this world of the beyond? It suddenly realizes, well, this is strange, because I'm a self-consciousness and I myself am formulating realms, and then say, stop, you are not to enter. Now this is so I'm formulating a concept to which I want to gain entrance, and at the same time, I am at the same time basically the one who throws myself away. Again, this is, maybe I'm part of the problem, so maybe I am the problem, which is of course the starting point of this level. But now self-consciousness realizes, well, this medicine is wrong. So, and again, once again, what we see here is that self-consciousness has to get rid of this second world, and has to understand that, and this is actually the lecture of self-consciousness, that, and this is again a version, an existential. We had the epistemologic version of dialectics, now we have the existential version of dialectics and consciousness. Well, maybe the finite and what comes with it, error, fault, pain, maybe it is not an opposite to truth, but maybe it's an aspect of truth itself. Maybe it's an aspect of, maybe there is no primer, original truth, or truth. Maybe there is only primer error. And this pain that I am experiencing is a means to understand truth. So truth is not despite of error, but because of error, and because of false. So again, we see a very dialectical, end of basically of the self-consciousness level, where we have once again an attempt to stay true to your world. You have to find a home in this finitude and get rid of the world, of the beyond world. What is interesting is here that Hegel never doubts that we need worlds. We need really concepts of worlds, because the individual immediately formulates principles and more general concepts. Why? Well, it is somehow as if the human being would be fine-tuned to a higher octave, as to say. It looks for the general in the individual. And this is where we enter what? Reason. And so we have now dissatisfaction has not disappeared. There is no happy end. But self-consciousness learned, well, I can accept it. I can maybe in a way ignore it, but I have to live with it. And it devises, but it wants really to stay true to the world and devises a new concept of the world based on the fact that maybe I myself and reality are bound up with one type of rationality. And so my faults, mistakes, errors, my pain is included in a general rationality that I can see in these wonderful patterns as well. There need to be individuals so that these wonderful patterns can be formed, and this very idea that I see the pattern, what a miracle. And this is not incidentally a level where Hegel says now really consciousness discovers the world and discovers an interest in the world. And this is, of course, the era of enlightenment. And then Hegel comes to talk about Kant and Fichte. And the idea is that we have the picture of reality now. Consciousness formulates a picture of reality as if it would be in essence a law. Now there are different laws, of course, and Hegel starts with all of them, or mentions some of them in this very long chapter. He starts with transcendental laws. So he already assumes that the form of my thought is the form of reality. But then he says, okay, transcendental laws, fine, but there have to be as well empirical laws, what a miracle that there are empirical laws, and that I can basically predict certain manners. This is an interesting twist, actually, that Hegel starts formulating, or consciousness formulating, concept of statistical laws. And this is interesting as well as to our situation, maybe, or maybe I don't know. But this is interesting because at the same time, this level of thought is related to the idea that the world can be governed. So statistical laws, so that reason can get hold of reality. It is my world. And these statistical laws help the governance a lot. And at the same time, we see it, for instance, an interesting picture. And I'm not sure if it would fit, but I'll just show you this an important passage. But for instance, today in this time of ecological crisis, we quite often hear, well, politicians have to listen to scientists, and they have immediately adopt measures that scientists formulate. Well, according to Hegel, this is a very specific concept of the world, to say the least. And let's have a look what concept of world this is. I mean, it seems to be as if it were a natural idea. Well, of course, scientists are here. We have the ecological crisis, so politicians have to listen. Well, but Hegel would suggest, well, let's look at the world picture we are talking about, and maybe it's more complicated, and maybe this is a really form of positivism that we might want to be more critical of. But this is only a side remark, and I hadn't thought it through. But it's not only natural laws, it's as well practical laws that come to the fore in this chapter. Consciousness realizes, yeah, but I'm not only a thinking being, I'm not only contemplating nature all day long. What I do most often is that I act. And but once again, because it is reason, it wants to have laws of action, practical laws. So this is why Hegel studies in these passages the categorical imperative, the concept of consciousness, and then the law of the heart, the romantics. So, as I said, it is here as if consciousness was tuned to a higher level. And Hegel at the end says, well, this is wonderful, this is really wonderful, but maybe the problem is, it is a world without a human being. There are laws, generalities, but the individual is not present. It is as if the individual did not exist, because the human being is the one who exists in the realm of the unpredictable. And this is, of course, the problem of statistical laws. They formulate certain likelihood, not the truth. Wahrscheinlichkeit ist nicht Wahrheit, as Hegel tells us in these passages. This is a slight problem for the scientists as well. And it is only the human being that can create Wahrheit. By acting and as an individual. So, and therefore, this world basically collapses on disregarding the individual and looking on general, on the laws, on the general side, and disregarding the individual. And once again, Hegel would not say that it's not wrong, but we have forgotten an entire continent, so to say, here. So these models are not wrong. They are one-sided, and we are looking for a way to integrate these world pictures, basically. And Hegel says, okay, so these are three abstract worlds, or I say my interpretation, and it is as if the first world was the world of consciousness. We ask, what if consciousness came up with a world picture? It would look like this. What if self-consciousness would come with a world picture? Well, it would be a fight. What if reason came up with a world picture? Well, it would be essentially laws, an intersection of laws. And Hegel says, okay, let's leave this for a while, and let's look at real worlds, where people lived, real individuals, not abstract models. And we have here the concept of the shape of worlds, and there are, of course, Hegel was German, so there is the important lectures from history is the Greek lecture, and then the Germans, and some French did something interesting as well. And I want to deal with it again in a very schematic picture, and we see that at the ancient world is once again dominated by laws, but laws that are holy, that are eternal, that come from our predecessors, that are basically incorporation of tradition. And in this, of course, Antigone is a spokesperson or spokeswoman of this idea. An ancient world is a world where duties precede the individual. So there are duties, and you grow into these duties. You grow into them, and you do not know where they come from, but the better. it's their advantage, basically. Well, and this is something the moderns don't go with. They want duties to arise with them, with their consciousness. They don't want to believe something only because it has been believed for a very long period of time. So why not go with it? And why? They want to see their consciousness in it. They want to have duties as their own effort. And this is, in my interpretation, the modern world. The modern world is the world, schematically said, where duties coincide with consciousness, and where the consciousness itself formulates duties. The human, we know where they come from. We abide by laws that are not eternal, but that are made by the parliament, that are passed by the parliament. And we have realized that they are not eternal, neither are they perfect, but hey, we can change them. This is the good thing once you realize that the other side, the duties are human too. So you can you are somehow on both sides, and this is where this is, in my interpretation, basically the modern world that generally establishes itself from the failed attempts to grasp reality, and in which absolute knowledge can be formulated. I will shortly come over to absolute knowledge, and then it will soon be over. But first, I have a passage that might, in a way, support my thesis that with the individual basically wants to see himself or herself in the concepts that were originally deemed holy, or had a theological origin, or were a taboo, and were understood as something given, something received, not as something made. And at the very end of Subjective Spirit, Hegel presents you a scene of reconciliation. And reconciliation is Versöhnung. So this is really theological hardcore. And now and the entire background of this scene seems to is infused with theological remarks and theological hints. But Hegel carries it and translates it into a completely secular atmosphere. Two people have done each other wrong, and now they are able to reconcile. And this very reconciliation is for him the instantiation of Versöhnung, and even the instantiation of God. And so you basically see this secularizing tendency of understanding even theological concept as something that is intersubjectively mediated, and that needs to be intersubjectively mediated in the modern world to be acceptable for consciousness, to be something it can relate to. So we are at the end of Subjective Spirit, and this is as well interesting that the highest point you can, because after subjective spirit we have the section on religion and art, and then we have the section of absolute knowledge, to which I will go over. But these are the last basically individuals that we meet at our voyage. And the highest point seems to be, for Hegel, the highest thing you can do is to reconcile with the other human being, which is once again, a very intersubjectively strong, from the perspective of intersubjectivity, a strong moment, but as well a thinker who is deemed very often to be rationalistic and very theoretically oriented. It seems to be very stressing power of the ratio. It seems to be quite minimal. But, well, maybe this form of reconciliation is, after all, the highest spiritual agenda you can fulfill. Now, what is important, or what is interesting for me, is as well that this figure of subjective spirit makes an appearance as well on the level of absolute knowledge. So there is a link, an intersection between absolute knowledge and subjective spirit. And now we come to the finale. And so remember, what I wanted to show you was that we started with 3 moments, with consciousness, reality, and attempts of consciousness to grasp reality, which led to the formulation of concepts of worlds, or world images. And now, absolute knowledge might be understood as basically as the moment where consciousness captures reality in the correct manner. And this means, what does this mean? It means, in my interpretation, that you find yourself in a situation and at the level of education, Bildung, in the sense of Bildung, that you know how consciousness, self-consciousness, and reason interacts, and that you yourself can know how they can be even transformable into each other. You know that if you stay at the level of consciousness, you want to be too close to reality and think you can only open your eyes. but well, this is Hegel shows, in order to know reality, you have to do a lot. In order to know truth, you have to move. And there is nothing natural, nothing immediate about knowledge. And self-consciousness stresses the distance towards the world, towards the other. Once again, you have to. This is a good insight, but you have to make a step back from your own self-consciousness, which is as well this reconciling moment with the other self-consciousness. And reason, thought, laws, yes, but the individual is not a law. So we have here what absolute knowledge then is basically a skill, in my understanding, not a knowledge, not something that could be captured in a sentence, but a technique to encounter reality. But this technique is possible to maintain only in a certain situation. For instance, in a situation where self-consciousness is something that is valued, something that is supported. And this is, so in this sense, I would claim that this possibility of interaction is possible only in the modern world. So in this sense, it is a historical moment where absolute knowledge can be articulated. And what is the modern world? What is specific to the modern world, wherefore absolute knowledge can be articulated? It is a time in which we realize that structures of thoughts flow basically into reality. that we change and we create reality. And thus, consciousness realizes that it somehow is on both sides of the equation. And we can as well here remember or think about Aristotle's thinking of thinking. Now, this is something that I think is strongly related to absolute knowledge, but in a strange way. If I think, then, and if I perceive, and if I learn something, then I always think something that has always been thought by someone else. So I relate basically to norms. I relate to a language, or I use a language that has been cultivated before, and I know that the norms I relate to are basically products of thought, solidified products of thought. So I think in thinking is basically a repetition. I think the other's thinking. So this is basically a Hegel or Aristotle turned social, and in this, but of course there is as well a but. Because consciousness does realize that it somehow participates at how reality is shaped. Yet at the same time, it realizes that it is not it doesn't do it immediately. It sees that the norms are not individual. Of course, they are by definition not individual. And so there is a strange form of distance towards the world that it has built on this pathway. It is somehow even as if the consciousness has built a world which it is not a part of as an individual. It is part of the world, but only as a person, as someone who has a certain role to play in society, but not as an individual. As an individual, it stands in front of the doors of society. Society is not made up of individuals. It is made up of communication that is supra-individual. And therefore it's really difficult to change it by individual means, or even impossible. And so now this is the last slide. I come to the end. As I said, there might be basically two ways, remember I told about these three aspects or three moments: consciousness, reality, and world. Absolute knowledge would be a certain period of time, but as well a certain manner of self-relation and relation to reality. When the consciousness realizes that it has correctly captured reality, which means it has understood that it builds up reality itself. And then reality and world would basically fall into one, and consciousness would face, not be part of. Consciousness would face the true world. Now, this was one interpretation of the scheme I have given you. But it might be even more ironic. So remember, we have these three moments, and maybe reality does not necessarily align with the model of the world, with modern society. Maybe it is more on the side of consciousness. Maybe, and of course this is an interpretation that probably goes way beyond Hegel. But we have on the pathway. We have what has consciousness learned is that it has constantly been evicted from any security, from any position it thought was secured to him, and eventually it was decimated or it was really beaten down to poor negativity. And now the interesting question is, what if reality is related to negativity, really, that is inherent in consciousness? Because if we look at the last lines of the Phenomenology of Spirit, only from the chalice of this realm of spirits foams forth for him his own infinitude, we see that what has consciousness achieved is that it understands that from a multitude comes infinitude, not the other way around. So we had to make this grand voyage, painful voyage, to understand this, that somehow the reality we find ourselves in the multitude is true. It really is. So and it's only from the multitude that the truth emerges. But what is the multitude? This is the multitude of consciousnesses, and thus in this sense, and consciousnesses are essentially related, or consciousness is essentially related for Hegel with negativity. And in this sense, that what does the foaming, the agent, so to say, would be the individual consciousness. And in this sense, it itself would have this wonderful dignity of transforming into infinity. And in this sense, I would, or we could, attribute to the individual this aspect of highest form of reality, because what is active, and the active is individual, is real, and it is as well because the individual is the one who can be creative, thanks to its own negativity, thanks to not being part of society, but thanks to being expelled from it, and having the ability to ponder, to think about reality. And at the same time, I would suggest that we have learned so far that to understand creativity as doing something new is a very naive way of understanding creativity. It's maybe it's really a new way of thinking, and a new way of seeing a void, really a void, seeing a void in what is, because everything already is. We know the absolute is with us, so there is nothing to create. But we can see in what is, we can see the void, we can see the cracks, we can see the possibilities. And for this we need negativity. And this would be basically the highest form, in my interpretation, of activity. So creation not as doing something positive, but as a form of subtraction, seeing what is not, but what could be, and seeing the cracks in what is, and initiating as well a form of change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tereza, for having accompanied us in this journey into the phenomenology and into a path that is the construction of consciousness is the construction of the world,
yes,
and
yes.
the twist between these two dimensions. So we have now some time for discussion. 40 minutes, I think. And so please, if you want to. Elena, may I ask you to come here for the...
Yeah.
There.
I would ask the question. Is it okay here? Or
Yeah,
shall
I think.
So, thank you very much for the talk, which I enjoyed very, very much. And I have a question. I'm not sure if you somehow answered it during your talk, and I didn't grasp the passages in which you did, or if it actually maybe something you could elaborate a little bit more on. So you said at the beginning that in the phenomenology what happens is that consciousness changes its concept of the world, its world picture, and alongside with this change, also the structure of consciousness, or better, its self-image changes. And I think that I followed really well the different transitions from different pictures of the world, from level 1 to level 5. What I didn't see very clearly is how exactly the structure of consciousness changes, because I had the feeling that it was always consciousness as the individual standpoint, or so to say as a mind opposed to a reality that becomes more and more complex, but still faced to an individual mind that's separated from its object, so to say. And on the other hand, also an individual mind that stays individual, so it doesn't change it doesn't become a collective structure of thought, like intersubjective. It doesn't incorporate on the side of consciousness all of this aspect of historical concepts, norms, and all the way up to a structure of thought that would correspond to absolute knowledge. So I understand how the world changes. I couldn't see entirely clearly how the structure of thought changes in this process. So I hope this came through clearly.
Okay, I hope so. Okay, this is thank you very much. I understand your question, and I think it is really something I should or could have elaborated on much more. And in the end, or in fact, I always pictured these individual faculties as certain relations to the world by individuals. Now, and this might be I grant you, or I would grant to your, or I see in your question as well a form of criticism of this attitude, which I think is perfectly legitimate. But I think that, or my interpretation was that on every level of the individual faculties, so to say, and what evolves a different relation to reality that is conditioned already, of course, by a new social reality, because once consciousness changes to self-consciousness, it finds itself as well by this self-perception in a different world. But still, it is as it understands itself. So it is as if I looked at the phenomenology and said, well, what would an individual look like at the level of self-consciousness and at the level of reason? Now, I absolutely grant to you the point that the world must have changed, and in my interpretation, it is really Hegel looks at the development of the faculties and basically abstracts from. He could have written a history here as well, but a history of people and societies. But he looks abstractly at it from the perspective of the evolution of the faculties. But I do understand that, for instance, reason, to consider reason an individual faculty might be problematic. I absolutely do agree with you. It's already more for Hegel a form of a world. Yet I think. He has certain, even Hegel has certain representants here, so or those who represent this concrete world picture, and for him it is at the beginning of the section of reason, it's Fichte. And Fichte's way of just thinking about the human being, what a human being is. And of course, it is a strange thing that in certain periods, somehow the world pictures coalesce into one, and that the individuals seem to see in reality the same things, and they seem to miss the same things. So, but I do grant you definitely this point. And it's not only Fichte. And then there are examples of Kant it's actually very strong in this section where Hegel stresses this enlightenment attempt to basically subject the entire reality to laws of the human mind, and you said it is as if I looked at it and said it is an individual facing the world, and I say yes, it's true, and it might be a problem of my interpretation. Yet I think that you can think of it as well this way, that for Hegel too, self-consciousness is not only a form of reality, but it's as well a faculty we have. And reason is as well, he wouldn't say faculty because it would be too, but it's a certain genre of thinking about ourselves and others. So, because unless individuals had it, I think that according to my interpretation, there would not be such a reality. Yeah, I hope I have answered your question.
Yes,
Julian, yes.
Thank you, Tereza, for your very thought-provoking paper. I have a question about another absence.
Another absence.
Absence, yeah. A missing word picture in your narrative, which is religion. I tried to formulate my question in the form of a provocation. So if we take the condition you mentioned to address absolute knowing, so for instance, a peculiar way of interaction between consciousness, self-consciousness and reason, this condition is in a way addressed also in religion, which Hegel defines as einfache Totalität. If we take the second condition, this peculiar way of interaction happens in a concrete world shape, in a historical moment. We have that in religion more than other spiritual shapes of guides of spirits. And third, if we take a structure of thought which flows into reality in a way in which there is a kind of participation which is not immediate, it's a mediated participation in reality where objectivity has its role. Again, we have this in cultus, for instance, we have a community, so we have not just an individual which participates into reality, we have a community where the participation of an individual is mediated. Of course, I'm not trying to suggest that absolute knowing and religion overlaps into another. I'm not suggesting that. But my question is whether absolute knowing in a way is not trying to address, to thematize a peculiar delay, a peculiar mediative relation to reality, which is expressed at its best by religion, more than other spiritual forms, spiritual shapes. That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You are, of course, right. There was a serious absence in my presentation. I would retort to you that it's. I think. It's not. Well, now it would be. Now the question would be, of course. You said that it basically religion satisfies all of my conditions, and I say no. Why? Because I would say. But this hinges as well on my concept of probably of self-consciousness that might not be fully correct. But I would say that this at the first level it fails because because in a religion, self-consciousness cannot be as well represented as Hegel wants it to be. Because and I think this is of course why he says that the consummate religion is Christianity, because here this everything turns towards the human being, that is God, so this is really a secularization. Of course, this is, and he says it's the world, it's a religion of the world. He says this, so this would be, but yet at the same time, what Hegel says, in religion, they miss it again, in Christianity, and I will base myself on Phenomenology of Spirit. What is the problem? Well, they didn't get Christianity. If they got Christianity with this Gemeinde, it would be fine. But what did they do? They created an otherworldly perspective once again. In the future, we will receive salvation. But Hegel would say, in his interpretation of Christianity, no, you have already been salvated. So do what you should do now, here. Nothing better happens, is about to happen. Everything has already happened. So I think this is basically the problem, that you still that once again you somehow want more than your own thinking. Okay?
Yeah, of course. But just didn't want to interrupt you, but my point was that precisely that kind of failed reconciliation that in religion appears is just something more than spiritual mutual reconciliation as a spiritual agenda. And my point was, when we think about absolute knowing, perhaps there is the possibility to address a kind of self-conscious, which is more mature, where negativity has failed, precisely because it's failed, because it fails. And not just that kind of spiritual mutual reconciliation. That was the point. I totally agree. I didn't want to.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, but of course, yes, you're right, and I agree with what you say, and with the idea that some form of this very complete world picture is already achieved in at the level of religion, and definitely. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
Or Luca. Marco? No, I was thinking that. Luca, do you want?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, okay. I wanted to put a question about the relation between the phenomenology of spirit and the system. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk, Patočka and Löwit, who think that Hegel's philosophy is wordless, that the nullity of the word is Hegel's central axiom, and so on. And I have the impression that both are speaking of the phenomenology and not of the system. They don't have a real confidence with the system, and much more with the phenomenology. And if we go to the paragraph 7 of the phenomenology, just a moment, I think I have here, 6 of the phenomenology is the famous paragraph where Hegel says that that the content of philosophy is none other than the basic content that has originally been produced and reproduces itself in the sphere of the living spirit, a content turned into a word. So the only content of philosophy is the word. But the word is this reality produced and reproduced by the living spirit. In the living spirit. So, if we want to see what is Hegel's notion of the word, I think that we have to go to the system. And my impression is that in the phenomenology we find a sort of continuous criticism of the different images of the word that characterizes the different form of consciousness, and perhaps what we find at the end of the phenomenology is the entrance in this idea of the word, the idea of the word that we find in the system. But we can't find the word into the phenomenology because the subject of phenomenology is consciousness and the relation with the other that is an essential characteristic of consciousness. But in this sense, I try to say Patočka and Löwit, they are right. Because if we think to phenomenology, we don't find really what the word is, but only what the word for the consciousness is. What do you think of this relation?
Okay. You are definitely right that Patočka levels, and for him it's really a criticism, and levels this criticism against Hegel's phenomenology, of which he knew very well because he was a translator. Yet I think they would go as far as really claiming that or at least Patočka, because he translated actually the science of logic as well, or parts of it. So I think his rejection of this side of Hegel would be more thorough. But what you said about the idea that we cannot find. And that they are right. Yeah, in a way, I agree with you. But what I find interesting is that, or I agree in parts with you, that what I find interesting is that the construction of false world images creates the true world at the end of the phenomenology of spirit. And so it is an essential, really a philosophy that strives and that wills the world. It's not, and there is something else to this as well, that I think Patočka, and that is just simply wrong in the sense that they think that basically in a very simplified manner think that, Hegel's think that the truth of everything is only thought, and that generally materiality and everything and the other is basically inessential. Whereas I want to say, well, yes, but the world is as well important for me in the sense that I think for Hegel really objects are important, empirical reality is important, because you think on basically on a detour. Thinking is a detour over real objects you have to, that force even consciousness on you. So that you have to fight, you have to work, you have to create objects, this entire idea of materiality is as well, I think, and corporeality as well is as well, I think, an aspect that has been at least in this tradition very often downgraded. Just in a very simplistic idea, it's the spirit, and what is the spirit? Something pure thought, but Hegel says as well, the logic is das Schattenreich. You have to logic in the world is what it's as if you thought that you had grabbed the essence of a language by learning grammar. No, you have to talk, in this way, this would be.
Thank you. Marco?
Congratulations on your talk. Maybe my question is a bit similar to the question of Professor Leclerati, but And I don't know if you agree with the statement that the philosophy of Hegel is wordless. But in your opinion, which is the main difference between the idealist Hegelian perspective about the world, the concept of the world, and a subjective perspective?
Wait a moment, could you, the end of it, could you...
A general question. In your opinion, which is the main difference between these two concepts of world?
Which two?
The idealist Hegelian and a subjective phenomenologist conception, as Patočka thought.
That's a good question. I don't have an answer to. Thank you. Yeah, as to the idea of whether I think, yeah, probably this goes really back to what I already answered to Luca's question. If it is a wordless philosophy, well, in a way, it's not, because the world is omnipresent in a way, because the starting point is already, of course, Hegel studies consciousness, but consciousness is for him really world generating, and so in this sense, it's in this sense it's omnipresent, and the spirit is as well of the world, and it's basically for me a counterpart to the what we can call subjective spirit, and then of course objective spirit would entail as well all the really objects and the materiality of the world. So in this sense, I do not agree with Patočka, and of course I do not agree, and as well it was really in more an example of and I think, but what I think is really the point in this criticism is that Hegel was not a friend of finitude and of the manifold. Well, and I think you can say a lot on this to support this idea, and you can find even more on to criticize this this perspective on Hegel, and I really want to use Hegel's language and Hegel's attitude or Hegel's philosophy to show that you can very well formulate a very strong concept of individuality in Hegel's philosophy, that basically as well that is so strong because it evades any form of either or, like either society or individuality. This is a question, of course, that is nonsensical for Hegel, because there are different forms of individuality, and individuality itself is a general concept. So this is, I think, what comes basically. This question: is there a world? Comes down to, can Hegel accept finitude? And I think he very well can, and and in this sense, I'm not on the side of Patočka's interpretation. Yet, in view of his concept of Lebenswelt. This is actually a very interesting. This is actually a very interesting concept where a lot of Hegelian insights come again into play. You basically, and of course there are different versions of how he formulates the Lebenswelt, but the Lebenswelt is, as he says, not a place. It's basically a dynamics of the individual, and it has three aspects, as you know better than I know, or three movements, and the one is the accepting movement, then the other one is the fighting movement or the competitive movement, and then we have this transcendent movement, the movement towards truth that somehow is able to transcend any individuality, and in this sense, what appears to me, but I'm not a good Patočka scholar, and in fact, it's my objective at what I want to do is to look at these basically world constitutive movements in the Hegelian consciousness and world constitutive movement in the Patočka's version. And I think what really would be the main difference is, but maybe I'm wrong here, I don't know, but is that Hegel really would not be such a good friend of transcendence of the third movement. I think this would be the problem. He wouldn't consider this a world constitutive dynamic and a part of Lebenswelt. But I'm not sure. Or he would use a different concept of transcendence, Hegel, not the Patočkan one, because this Patočka movement is really a form of sacrifice, and this is a too strong word for Hegel. You don't sacrifice, I think, yourself. I don't
How is the correct pronunciation? Patočka or Patočka?
Patočka.
Patočka. Luca?
Yes. Yeah.
Come here.
Here. Yeah. Thanks for that. I mean, my question is basically a version of the one that Luca already asked. So, so I don't know whether I should ask it again, but I will try to phrase it in a different way, and it's still about the notion of world that is at work in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Let me try to phrase it in this way, starting from a totally different angle and a different philosophy. Talking about Anscombe, she has this famous idea regarding the notion of causality, saying that the notion of causality actually is quite empty, because every time you use the notion of causality in your sentences, what you're actually doing is expressing a different thing. So every time you use the X causes Y, you can say instead, you can use other verbs, like X pushes, pulls, falls down, etc., etc. So, I have the same impression that Hegel uses the notion of word in the Phenomenology of Spirit. In exactly the same sense. So as an empty sort of concept, that it can be filled in with very different sorts of descriptions. So, individual world, historical, you said that. Some worlds are collective, some are individual. Some are historical, some are not. And in the end we discovered that the idea that there is the world out there is not even, correct. So that pushed me to, at the beginning you said there is a world in Hegel's philosophy, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. At the end of your talk, I was like, no, there is not. All what you said pointed to the fact that there is not a world. And that seems to be just an operational concept, or empty one, at least in the phenomenology, that can be fulfilled with different descriptions along the way. So I wanted to ask you about this.
Okay, yeah. No, your suspicion is completely right. I think Hegel uses the concept of world in very different manners, and this is for him it's not a concept at all. It's not a concept he would pay systematic attention to. And I think so. So he uses it even more wildly than other concepts he uses, I think. But at the same time, this was for me interesting or a challenge, because I thought, well, okay, I want to start with a concept that is not, let's say, truly Hegelian, or that is one of his most prominent concept or images, because then you gain distance as well from his philosophy as well. So this was, for me, this was basically an advantage of this concept, that it's not really his concept, or that it's not his favorite, or that he doesn't call it a concept at all. And then, if we say, as I tried to show, that world is a picture of reality, then I made myself a form of definition of what it is, and then I can, I think, or I tried to show that you can work with it quite consistently. And of course you can use it for different means, but my idea is that it does show you something that might not be as overtly present in the phenomenology if you don't use this hermeneutical key that was the world for me. And but yes, I mean, Hegel uses it differently, and I think that there is this danger that it starts being basically a void. But what I want to capture really in this concept is what I call the substantial experience. That for a world to exist, there needs to be interaction of consciousness with reality, so there needs to be this subjective moment, and then there is always consciousness comes in plurality, in concrete plurality. There is no, if there was only one consciousness, it would not exist. So this idea of plurality as well. So it is basically a translation for me of Hegel's holism into a concept I can grasp better. Now, and what you said as well, at the end, that there was no world in the end. Well, I wouldn't say that. This is what I wanted to show, actually. I did want to show that what appears is the reality that is infused, that is understood as infused with human categories. And that is considered the world for consciousness. So consciousness world is basically a set of norms that it knows it itself has created, and it itself has can manipulate with. And so a human constituted reality is for me the world that the phenomenology leads towards. And I think this is a legitimate way to use the concept of world. It doesn't need to be a specific place. I mean, it's a type of interaction of consciousness and reality. And of course, it has as well. But the concept of world is for me important as well. That it has these connotations that. It is a specific type of. It's not only. I'm not saying that it's only consciousness and norms, but really a plurality of things. For instance, of certain material reality. And therefore, I use, and therefore, what I didn't stress in this lecture. Therefore, the concept of world is important. It's in a way, it's really a place too, but not only a place. It's a place that is constituted by a certain dynamics of consciousness. Does it make sense to you? Yeah. Not sure.
Can I?
Yeah.
You
have to go there.
No, then we can talk about it. Yes, no, my only worry is that the way you use the notion of world in your initial definition that you want to use to define things, and the notion of world that you end up with at the end of this journey are two different meanings of world. If that's fine, then okay. But we do call both them words still. The first definition was wrong. The new one is fine. Yes.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Then there is another point. Yes, it seems that it's difficult to see Hegel as giving a definition initially, and
giving a definition.
A definition initially, giving an initial definition, and then work things out of it, right? It seems Hegelian as a procedure. You start with something that you have, like a strange conception of world, and then you work out the consequences that this kind of conception that you have invokes.
Yeah.
But that's not an initial definition of the concept of work, right? Also, the procedure seems strange that you want to attribute to Hegel, but that's a different issue.
I don't know if I want to attribute a specific procedure to Hegel. It was just my procedure, and maybe it's not Hegelian, but I don't care about it. It's my reading. I think it's legitimate to, and I think I presented it here. I started with the definition, yes, to make it clear to you what I want to. I think to get the terms right. And I don't care what Hegel would say to this, because it's my reading. Yeah. So, so this is something I really don't care about. But of course, the other thing is that the first part of your question is a suspicion you raised that is absolutely legitimate, and I think. That it really what we start from is world more as well. What I said is that I mean, you are right, and I might have stressed it more, and I think I replied to this as well in relation to Luca's question, is that you don't start with the world. You start as well because the first levels are abstract. Hegel says they are abstract. You have consciousness, you have self-consciousness, and you have reason, and they do not exist in this way. Now, of course, this is and so these are really world pictures, models that suddenly, and the model suddenly starts to be alive. So what has started as really a model attempt to reach reality has turned into reality. So these might be two different ways to. Yes, it is of course, but maybe there is something not as absurd to it. You may think of the love your neighbor, and then you may do it and change the situation. You may create the situation. You can walk from an injunction to so and I think this is and I think in a way this is what Hegel says, that we start with the idea that the world is just there, and or reality is there, and we are passive towards it, and then we realize the world concept creates world, and so. And it comes to life. So, and of course, even the idea of freedom can make yourself can as well very profoundly come to life and create a new situation. So, I don't think that this is an experience that would be totally uncommon. And even though I really think that this is a point Hegel wants to show, that actually thought is alive. So the way you think about society, the way society looks like, I mean, of course, not in this immediate scenario, but I think this is a key idea of Hegel. yeah, so this is something that's too. But I do understand your criticism, and I should have probably anticipated and more stress basically this aspect. But on the other hand, Hegel as well explicitly says it's only at the end that, and you said it as well. Yes, we come to reconstruct and we come to relive the entire Weltlichkeit, and of course, after this voyage, long voyage, the concepts do change. Yes, and I think this is as well what Hegel tells us too. But yeah, but I've said already too much. Thank you. You are right, of course.
The last question, Sasha.
The last.
Yeah.
To go there as a. Oh, can just move the. So thank you for starting the lecture. And just want to show how I know the track. So actually it's connected. It's partly also answered. So maybe this discussion. I have just a series of shortcut questions about the concept of the world and how do we use this concept and why do we need the concept and what does it tell to us. So I think that in your approach you're forced to deal with the concept of the world and it's justified because it's a phenomenology, on the subjectivistic or representationalist level. And that's this concept of world picture actually. It's very interesting. And your starting point about the world was exactly the concept of world picture. And my first association was actually not Hegel, I don't know whether he's using the world picture value as a term, it was Heidegger, who has the concept of Weltbild, of the world image, world picture. So, and it's also, it's more like Russian is interesting because the concept of world is very important in the being of time, so young Heidegger. And then he moves to the Weltbild, in the age of the Weltbild, of the world picture. So you have to move from the world to the world picture. I mean, in Hegel or in your interpretation of Hegel, is somehow opposite. We are moving from the world picture to the world. So my question would be, if the world is substantially a world picture, is the world substantially a world image, world picture, and if the world picture is, if the world is always a world for consciousness, then it must be a world picture, world image. So, and in that case, it's just a Vorstellung. So, well, it's just like so. Is that just world is just a concept that we can treat on this representationalist level? And if yes, then what would be this true world at the end? It would be no world, because we don't, at the end of the phenomenology, at the end of what, because the absolute knowing we cannot treat anymore in representationalist terms. So to be like, maybe to say, okay, the phenomenology of Hegel's phenomenology is not wordless, but it tends to be wordless. So at the end of phenomenology would be no world in this sense, no? It could be maybe connected by this move from the beginning, like you're starting from the, I agree actually with this, with Lucas' approach, to start from the one concept of world, so that's a world picture, and then there is a move toward the end where actually there is no world, because there is no world picture, there is some other, if there is another concept of world. With absolute knowing. So I don't know if it was.
Yeah, I mean it was. I do understand the criticism. Yet I do not know if it is necessary to interpret it really with in the concept of world as I use it in. In these Hegelian terms, let's say, and assume that in the end there is no world, because there would be no Vorstellung. to start with, I don't think that Hegel would say there is no Vorstellung, because I mean, of course these faculties exist, but we understand their meaning, and this is actually the point. We understand the nature of the model that has now come to life. And so even if we continue, we still continue, or we do not stop making Vorstellungen, but we understand their logic. Why? Because we have arrived at the level of absolute knowledge, so it becomes transparent. Our thinking becomes transparent, and as well, the way reality is constituted. So this is, and of course, this is something Hegel assumes for absolute knowledge. I'm not sure if it is right, but I would absolutely dispute the idea that there is no Vorstellung. This does not work.
Where? There is no Vorstellung?
In the absolute knowledge.
Yeah, of course.
Of course it is present, but you understand their logic. So, and of course there is world, and of course there is my body, and of course there is sensing, and of course there is empirical reality. The idea is that I see what it means that they are there. So, so I would absolutely dispute this point.
Yeah, okay, it's like it's the same question whether it is absolute knowledge is knowledge or it's a special kind. I mean, it's like some kind of the different type of knowledge as different type of representation of Vorstellung. So I mean, in any case, I agree. But we cannot treat it as on the same level as all other previous.
No. I wouldn't want. I really, and this is something I should have stressed, and you are right to stress this in this. In this context, and yes, so that.
But then can we say that actually that phenomenology actually tends to be wordless in some sense? That's this internal dynamics, his tendency to be wordless.
But why?
In order to move, I mean, it's like just this moving from one figure to another, and then a combination with absolute knowledge, knowing.
But my idea would be that it really culminates in this transparent reality that is for Hegel the highest concept of the world, where the model becomes during the voyage it has evolved, and it has formulated and has articulated. I mean, the idea is that that somehow. Consciousness needs to formulate a form of itself and of its freedom that does not totally conflict with what is real. And it constantly realizes that in the individual model that somehow it creates models that do conflict with what is real, for instance, with the plurality of other people. This is the main problem. So it has to integrate, and it has to constantly integrate these clashes with reality into its model. And this model is basically full of everything that could clash. It becomes real. So this is an absolutely world a philosophy in this interpretation, and I know that it has many faults, but that would, quite on the contrary, lead towards the world in the sense of understanding the positive idea of the manifold, the positive idea of plurality, and really as well of materiality. But of course, not only of this, you can understand them well because you think well. This is as well the idea behind it.
Okay, I think we have pressed Tereza enough.
No.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion.
No, thank you for your attention. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for pressing me. Thank you.